Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. What I'd like to do is actually take you through what are five of the most critical skills that IT leaders and leaders in general need in the new digital age. But first, let me see if I can introduce myself. So my name is Damien Cummings. I'm at NUS-ISS. I'm the Chief of the Digital Strategy and Leadership Practice. I'm new to the organization, but before that, I've actually come out of different type of roles in industry. I've spent almost 30 years at the cutting edge of digital transformation. I used to be the global head of digital at Standard Chartered. I was the chief marketing officer at Philips, and I held senior e-commerce marketing and digital roles at Samsung, Coca-Cola, and started out my career many years ago at McKinsey. I'd love to stay in touch. So if you're active on social media, please connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter. And if you really want a copy of this presentation or to actually have a few questions afterwards, I'm more than happy to actually exchange conversations via email. So if you've got a chance, please take note of those, that my information now. So what I'd like to do is discuss really 6 things today. First, what I want to do is set the expectations, set the background, set the context. So there are many trends that have recently shaped Singapore and Southeast Asia, and really we need to define what digital age means. Next, I want to go through in a little detail each of the top 5 skills that IT leaders need for the digital age. I'm going to talk about digital transformation, why it fails, and how you can avoid that. I'm going to talk about managing change and the resistance that you see in most organizations around new change initiatives. I want to talk about how to become a great manager and manage your people better. I want to actually talk a little bit about data and actually the different phases you go through when you're actually on a data governance, management, and of course, implementation journey, and finish up with a bit of self-awareness and reflection, which is obviously important for any manager engaging a team or engaging other stakeholders in an organization. So we're going to cover those 5 skills, but before I do that, let me talk about a bit of the context. So what are the current trends in the digital age? I've taken a very strong look at Southeast Asia and Singapore specifically, and there are 8 things that tending to shape what we're seeing in digital and we're seeing in the digital age now. As we all experienced with the COVID and with lockdown in 2020 and 2021, we've seen 5 years of digital transformation happen very quickly within the space of less than a year. Across Southeast Asia, we've seen many people, consumers, individuals, revert from physical face-to-face shopping into e-commerce. We're seeing tools, collaboration tools used at work, and there's a rise of things like Microsoft Teams, Slack, and of course, Zoom that we're on today. We're seeing that the internet penetration has surpassed India, and the consumers in Southeast Asia are actually rapidly rising. We're seeing the change has been driven by CEOs. It's against the trend we're seeing worldwide. A little later, I'm going to talk about the different roles that shape digital transformation, but we're seeing in Singapore, senior leaders are taking the bull by the horns. They're the ones driving change in their organization. And that's actually ahead of what we're seeing in other parts of the world. We're seeing a very strong move towards remote working and digital HR. We know the pandemic has permanently changed the way people work and want to work. In general, people want more flexibility. I think moving forward, we all expect a hybrid business model between home, work, and somewhere in between to be the default. And of course, that means that there's new technology stacks to work on, whether it be data around HR technology, keeping track of where employees are, looking at productivity, looking at engagement, and of course, a little bit further down the track, looking at how we can actually develop employees and make sure they're actually in line for performance improvements, succession planning, and so on. And of course, that's incredibly difficult to do when you're not face-to-face. So we're going to see a lot of the future of work change because of what we've seen with the pandemic. And it doesn't get easier. More tech disruption is coming. We know across Southeast Asia, and particularly in Singapore, there's actually been a record in unspent venture capital. At the end of 2019, there was almost $9 billion of unspent capital that's waiting to be spent across startups and corporate innovation. Of course, that means that the door is wide open for new technology disruptors to come in and look at the status quo. We're seeing it with larger scale-ups such as Grab, who actually are partnered with Singtel for the Grab digital bank. We're seeing it in fintech, we're seeing it in e-commerce, we're seeing it across software, SaaS, and almost every part of the tech ecosystem. So with that amount of money coming out of there and a lower risk to take big, bold chances, we're going to see a lot of great startups and scale-ups emerging from Singapore and Southeast Asia. In e-commerce, it's going big. We know that across the world, Southeast Asia is actually, in terms of compound annual growth rate, or CAGR, growing faster than China. It's growing faster than India. And of course, it's growing faster than the US. So we're seeing a 23% CAGR year over year from 2018 to 2020. We're seeing the rise of Southeast Asian e-tail. Actually, it's bigger than India now. And it's only going to get bigger with those massive growth rates. For those of you working in the MAS or working in the fintech space or with financial services companies, this will come as no surprise. With the rise of e-commerce, has also helped the rise of fintech. Singapore is lucky to actually house 40% of Southeast Asia's fintech firms. There's been a tenfold increase over 5 years from 2015 to 2020. We had about 1,000 fintechs back in 2015. We had about 100 fintechs 5 years ago. There's over 1,000 now. The category now has over 10,000 employees in it and is growing fast. And the final 2 points, digital marketing. For those of you working in commercial roles, we've seen the ongoing rapid rise of digital marketing, driven by e-commerce, driven by fintech, driven by companies needing to actually reach customers when they're no longer available face-to-face. We're seeing that digital marketing spend will continue across all channels. A lot going into display, so Facebook advertising, Google, a lot more going into paid retargeting. We're seeing social media continue to rise, search marketing, and content. It's all expected to rise over the next 6 to 12 months. And finally, I think you're getting a sense that there's so much happening. But of course, not everyone's keeping up. There's a huge digital skills gap that every worker is now facing. With the intense demands of new software, new ways of working, engaging on the cloud versus face-to-face, we're now seeing that every worker in the region will need to gain at least 7 new digital skills to keep pace with the technology evolution. We also know that that skills increase is going to grow 5-fold over the next few years to 2025. That means across Southeast Asia and Singapore specifically, we have 5.7 billion digital trainings will be required across the entire workforce. So there's a lot going on. If I had to summarize these 8 points, I'd say there's constant change. And if you're in a leadership role, you need to have the right skills, not necessarily technical skills, but dealing with change, dealing with disruption, dealing with team members to make things happen. So that's the context. Lots going on. Let me talk about the 5 skills that you need to actually achieve leadership in this digital age. So skill number 1, you need to take a leadership role in digital transformation. Now, I'll explain what digital transformation is and where it falls down, but this doesn't matter whether you're a junior executive coming into your first role or whether you're the CEO of an organization. Everyone needs to play a role in digital transformation success. Now, why is that? Well, the reality is so many digital transformation programs fail. There are different numbers out there in the market on this. The statistics vary, but I like this one because it's somewhere in the middle. It tells me that only 16% of digital transformation programs succeed, 84% failing. Now, of course, small programs are not truly digital transformation. Giving everyone access to Zoom so they can work from home is not a digital transformation program. Fundamentally moving your retail model to an e-commerce model is much more of a digital transformation. But there are many moving parts of why that might go right and why that might go wrong. And to look at the building blocks of digital transformation, it's really summed up by looking at these kind of 5 core elements backed up by people. So to get any digital transformation right, it's a combination of factors. First of all, common sense. You need a strategy. You need to understand where you are today versus where you're going to be in a year, 5 years, 10 years. Could even be next quarter. But so often that's missing. Having a clear set of goals, a clear strategy of where you want to be that differentiates you from standard digitization. Next, you need engagement. You can sit in an ivory tower all you want with great ideas and a great thought of what your digital transformation might look like. But until you've taken every stakeholder along that journey, from the frontline staff all the way through to the C-level and board, everyone needs to be on that journey with you. And of course, the digital transformation by its very nature must be innovative. It's very easy to actually just digitize something, But digital transformation usually implies that there must be a step forward. There's got to be an evolution or a revolution associated with this, otherwise you're barely keeping up. And of course, again, common sense, it needs to be technologically enabled. There needs to be a technology element to it, whether that be cloud-based software, whether it be new hardware you need to put in place. Generally, without tech, the whole thing is going to fall over. And one of my favorites is the data and analytics side. Data is your speedometer. Data gives you a sense of where you're going in this whole journey. Without data, it's difficult to understand where you are, where you're going, and where you've been. But underpinning all of that is the people aspect. It's about developing the right skill sets, about having leadership that's forward thinking. It's about taking people on the journey. And of course, it's about upskilling. As I was saying in the earlier slide, there's almost 6 billion trainings needed to actually get all of our employees, leaders, and managers up to date on what's happening with digital. It's a huge commitment, but we're going through a milestone moment of our human evolution, this digital transformation. So the challenge is, if you start to break these different elements down, you start to look at why only 16% of companies are succeeding. Because generally you might be doing a few of these things right, but when you're doing some of them wrong, the whole thing falls apart. And let me explain where those fall down points or those break points are. First point is if you lack strategy. As I was saying earlier, a lot of digitization happens when you do all the rest of them, but you don't actually have a clear vision. So often it's you need to actually do something because there's been a fire lit under you. We need to work from home today. So therefore, let's put in a collaboration tool like Slack or Microsoft Teams. So you do that. Okay, great. But what does that then mean? Does it mean you have to have a productivity suite? Do you need to track people's time and attendance? Do you need to then look at what people are working on? Do you need to look at what's happening with their performance reviews? Does any of those things change? Are you checking in on people's mental well-being? Again, once you do one of those things, you haven't actually achieved the rest of them, which are also critical dependencies. So when you don't have a strategy, when you can't clearly articulate where you are today and where you're going to be tomorrow, you fall into the trap called digitization. The second challenge is, and the most common challenge, is when you lack engagement. Now, I will talk about this as the next skill, but this is really about the change management process that every leader's got to go through. So you've clearly defined your strategy, you know where you're going to be tomorrow, you know it's innovative, you've actually lined up the best tech vendors, and you've got a very kind of data-driven view of how well you're going to perform. But every mid-level manager in your organization hates the idea. They want to go back to the way they've always done things. They prefer this paper-based approach. You're in an organization that relies on face-to-face and building relationships. But for whatever reason, they are used as crutches and excuses to resist any change. And we've all heard this. We know change is difficult. Everyone loves change except when you've got to do it yourself. But this is usually the number one reason why most digital transformation projects go wrong. And as a leader looking at the skills for the digital age, this is where you need to spend a lot of your time. Next, you lack innovation. Now, innovation really drives you forward. So you've got a strategy, you've even done the great step of getting everyone involved. They're engaged, they're on the journey with you. You've lined up a fantastic tech vendor, you're doing data and analytics, but the innovation's taken you backwards. You've digitized, yes. You've overcome resistance, yes. But the problem is without innovation, you're really just going backwards. And that leads to incoherent action. And that's a real problem. Next, well, this sounds like a very basic one, is if you have all the other elements in play, but you don't have the technology, it leads to a high degree of frustration. Now, I don't want to be flippant and say, hey, you can't get around not having a piece of software, not having the hardware in place. But actually, what usually happens here is you upgrade or downgrade to a solution that doesn't fit your needs. You might have gone for a cheaper vendor. You might have gone for a vendor with the different specifications. So even though there's the right kind of technology on paper in front of you, it's actually the wrong specs. It's solving the wrong problem, or you've gone for a cheaper vendor that actually has lowered the features, specifications, and so on. So it's not always necessarily just a lack of the hardware and software. Sometimes it can be the wrong scope or the wrong spec or the wrong vendor. And again, anytime that happens, there's always a great degree of frustration. And finally, if you don't have data, data is your milestone. Data is giving you a sense of your direction. It's your map and your compass. So you can have all the other elements right, but if you don't know where you're going, you're actually stuck with gut feel and guesswork. And this is very, very kind of frustrating. This leads to a great deal of stagnation. You just simply can't move forward. So it's important to make sure you clearly map out the goals at the beginning of a project, be delivering real-time data as much as possible, and make sure that you're clearly aligned on what the definitions of that data and analytics look like. So in essence, what you're seeing here are these are the 5 evil beings that are going to stop your journey. These are the road bumps, the cul-de-sacs, and the challenges you will face as a leader. And these are the things that you need to get across if you want to be successful as an IT leader in the digital age. But I want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about who leads digital transformation. I talked a little earlier that CEOs in Southeast Asia have taken the bull by the horns. They are the ones that are leading digital transformation. But there is a nuance to this. And again, I am presenting global data here, but what I do want to do is actually talk about the different people and different functions that are leading digital and why you need to collaborate across departments with these people. So this data tells us that traditionally, up until about a year or so ago, chief marketing officers have been leading digital transformation. And I guess that's not really a surprise if you think about it. They generally have a large customer-facing budget. What they do is flexible in nature. They're not usually tied into 2, 3, 4-year service level agreements. They're extraordinarily customer-focused. Normally your CMO is the person at the board level who is the voice of the customer. And what's happening is they're doing many small tests. They're making things happen. They're driving customer-centric activities such as e-commerce, omnichannel. They're driving sales and marketing activity and integration around data there. They're looking at CRM systems. They're also pushing our colleagues in the IT space to do more. So we are seeing that the CMO is gradually taking a reduced or a backseat role in digital transformation, but they are a key player. And again, as an IT leader, you can work very closely with CMOs to actually use test and target and potentially double the budget between big capital projects and what we're seeing with short, sharp tests with markets and with customers. CEOs. In Asia, what we're seeing is that CEOs should definitely lead, but the challenge is they don't always have the right skill sets or the background. If you're in a family-owned organization or you've worked your way up the ranks to become the most senior executive in your company, you generally don't have a strong digital transformation background. You might not be used to digital, you're probably not used to IT buying processes, you generally may delegate too much. So the challenge is CEOs need to take that clear lead and vision, but they're not always up to speed. So they rely on their CIO, they rely on a new role, the Chief Digital Officer or Chief Data Officer, and generally they're taking a bit of a back seat. But again, we're seeing that changing. So at the expense of CMOs, CEOs are now kind of coming to the fore. We're now seeing CIOs and CTOs. Now the challenge is CIOs, again, are in the driver's seat of digital transformation, but generally have less flexible budgets. There's a business case required, there's a board level discussion, and a lot of the budget is actually fixed into significant systems. Your Oracle, your SAP, your Salesforce are multi-million-dollar purchases. You're tied into long-term service level agreements, and changing those is not always simple. If you need to test and target, there's not usually an innovation budget available, or you've got to go through a long-winded process to get the money to try that. Now, of course, that's changing. And we are seeing, the CMOs are pushing some of the money over to the CIOs and CTOs to actually get more flexible, more innovative, and faster to market with startups, corporate innovation, and general digital transformation. But finally, we've got the black sheep, the Chief Digital Officer here. Now, what has happened over the past 10 years is most head of digital or CDOs are more super consultants. They're coming in, they're not a department head, they don't manage large functions, they don't have a strong control over the IT or the infrastructure aspect, nor do they manage a marketing budget. They're coming in and actually providing advice to the CEO who may not have the right skill sets. So that does work when you need incremental 2 business speeds. So the core business working at 1 speed, and of course the digital aspect an innovation group, a lab, or something else being run as a side or sister business. But CDOs, I think, will go out of favor eventually, and their roles will actually be subsumed by the CIO and some degree the CMO, as they're divided up between digital marketing, which fits on one side, and project-based technology innovation, which sits on the CIO side. But CDOs are here, they're going to be around for a while, and certainly a percentage of transformation projects are going to be led by these heads of digital. So just winding out on the first skill, what are the 4 critical roles of IT in digital transformation and how you can engage and upskill yourself? First of all, I'd love to see you guys co-creating a strategy. It's not a good position to be in when you're given the strategy. You need to be in a position where you're co-creating it. Engage the marketing team, engage the digital team, sit down with the board, sit down with the CEO, clearly articulate your priorities, break it down into the 5 building blocks, then actually put in place a people plan to make it happen. Of course, engagement, overcoming resistance is key. Not everyone is always going to be charismatic, great communicator, or have the ability to overcome change, but the most successful IT leaders will have this skill set. Next, you need to make sure data is understood. Now, this goes a little against about how CIOs and IT departments work, because most of the time data is a little bit siloed. The idea behind this is it's more than just business data. It's understanding the outputs of data and the levers that they control. Is it cost reduction? Is it growth, sales, or efficiency? You need to take control of these things and, more importantly, have them understood by all employees. All employees need to understand this. So that means if you have a sales team that are not logging into Salesforce and updating CRM, they need to understand what impact that has. The ability, that means that it impedes the ability for a CFO to make financial forecasts. It impacts the ability of business cases to get approved and generally causes a lot of angst. And that's just one example. Across every part of the organization, an IT leader can actually take that step up and clearly articulate what the important data is and how it should be understood by all parties. And of course, the other aspect, the final aspect is really, hey, as a digital leader, you can go through a process of making sure that your entire organization is digitally upskilled. And it is a responsibility of the digital transformation specialist. Everyone needs to be digital literate. The entire organization knows to go from 0 to 1 and from 1 to 10. That means that a version of a digital passport, a common terminology, easily understood acronyms are all kind of laid out and bare. You need to make sure the people you have in your organization, from the frontline intern all the way up to the CEO, are on the same page in terms of understanding capability, looking at digital, and understanding the data. If you do these 4 things, you will be a very successful digital transformation leader, and you will be in the 16% of projects that succeed. So I'm going to change gear a little bit and talk about a little bit about overcoming resistance and managing change. So overcoming resistance is really just taken from what we've just talked about in terms of a digital transformation rollout. So I talked about 84% of digital transformations fail, but within that, 70% of change efforts fail outright. And this is due to employee resistance. So within the 84%, most of that is coming from change management, employee resistance, or generally people actually not getting involved on the journey. Now, the journey looks like this. Many of you might recognize the Kubler-Ross change curve. And if you think about this in your personal life, this will probably not come as a surprise. So if you start over on the left side of the screen, you'll see that, well, on the horizontal axis, you can see that there's morale and competence, and over the bottom is actually over time. So you can see whenever there's a new change initiative, it's usually met by shock. Surprise at best, shock at worst. So again, often there's a fatigue that comes with change. People just don't want to change from their existing way of working. There's generally an unpleasantness to a new initiative that's been kind of foisted upon you. Then you go through a short period of denial. I don't want to do this. We don't need to do this. You know, let's let's kind of look at the numbers. Let's kind of prove that the existing process is the perfect one. We just don't need another piece of software. We don't need to go through a digital transformation journey. We don't need to do the thing that you're asking me to do. But of course, once those denials are usually proven to be untrue, then it leads to two things: an immediate frustration, anger, and then once that anger freezes, it becomes depression. Now, the more you do change, the more often you find yourself in this kind of pit of despair. The frustration and depression becomes kind of endemic across your organization. So the challenge is, how do you take people out of that depression and move them into an experimentation phase? I tend to find if you can find the biggest losers inside your organization of the change that you're trying to implement, engage them up front, find change champions in your organization, look at a steering committee of people who are going to be most massively impacted by this change, get them on board, give them leeway, give them power, give them the ability to experiment. If you can get them experimenting, they will self-evolve out of the frustration and depression mode and start to move to a decision-making and integration mode. It all hinges on how much you can actually allow your stakeholders, team members, and employees to experiment. They've got to actually give it a go, try it out, and find, hey, maybe this is not so bad. Maybe this is something I can get used to. And once they use it a few times, and they're used to using it 2 or 3 times, they say, well, you know what? I feel positive about this. I made the right decision. This is great. I now want to become a change champion myself. And if you can incentivize that behavior, reward it, give people awards, give them recognition for a job well done, they're going to get positive affirmation of the things they've been doing with your change projects. And finally, it becomes the new normal. It becomes integrated over time. This is the way things have always been done here. They actually onboard new employees into the organization with this great new process and technology that we put in place. So understanding the Kubler-Ross change curve and understanding that people go through these different emotions and understanding the pivotal aspect of it is allowing empowerment and experimentation is critical for you to become a better change manager. And finally, there's one other thing to look at, which is 3 C's of change management. Now, this might appear as common sense. So it's really 3 C's you can just remember to help with your change management protocols. Number 1, communicate. We find unsuccessful leaders focus on the what. The people who are very successful talk about the why. Why are we doing this? What is our purpose? Why am I negotiating this change? Why am I asking you to do new things? Own it on a personal level. Be responsible. If you're going in and actually making change to a contact center, move your office away from your ivory tower at corporate HQ, sit down with that contact center staff. If you're actually talking about frontline sales leaders, become a sales manager. Get out there, understand what they go through. If you're talking about back office staff, sit in the back office. It's really understanding through empathy, going through a process of understanding the purpose of what you're doing, clearly communicating the why, because the what often follows the why. Of course, the next step is collaboration. No one is an island. You cannot do any kind of change alone. It requires a great deal of collaboration. I often find that the opposite of perfect is fast. Perfect is not what you want to aim for. Fast is. So you want to take an iterative process. Communicate your vision, have your clear strategy mapped out over the course of months, quarters, and years. Talk about the data you need to actually get to where you want, and then get that in front of as many people as possible. Collaborate, break down borders, get people involved in the journey. Take yourself out of the equation, take your ego out of the equation, and make sure this is something that everyone's on board with. Get rid of unhealthy competition. Make sure it's collaborative. And of course, once you actually start to get a camaraderie, a sense of team, and a sense of purpose around this team, good things happen. And finally, commit. I've already talked about actually the empathy and relocating yourself to who's ever impacted by change, but you need to make sure this aligns to your personal beliefs. You need to walk the talk. If you've made a big call to move to a completely online ordering, but you're still walking into a physical one of your stores and actually placing that order, you are clearly not walking your own talk. So bite the bullet, commit. Be the lead, be the change that everyone wants to see. If you're doing an e-commerce project, start buying e-commerce. Get people involved in the systems immediately. Commit. Go outside of your comfort zone because you can't expect anyone else to if you haven't done that yourself. Don't be afraid of communicating that. Put it up in your internal systems, your Slack, your Teams, your other intranet. Show photos of you committing to the change that you've actually asking everyone else to. Use simple communication tools to get there as well. So generally, if you understand the curve, if you understand how to communicate, collaborate, and commit, you're in a very good position to improve your change management skills. I'm going to move to the third skill, which is excellent people management. Now, excellent people management is kind of a given, but so often if you're sitting in a technical role, you're, I guess, so often thinking about the hard skills you need to develop. Yes, I need to understand data. Yes, I need to understand cloud. Yes, I need to understand new technologies like VR, AR, blockchain, you name it, I've got to be across it. But the reality is, at the end of the day, that's not what drives business. What drives business is the team you've hired, how well you've managed them, and are they performing well? So here's a challenge. 70% of your team, 70% of your employees are currently disengaged. 80% of that is because of their direct manager. You might have heard this saying that people leave managers, they don't leave companies. And I'll talk a bit about self-reflection a little bit later, but the challenge is you've got to assume the people in your team don't want to be there, they're disenfranchised, they are disengaged, and you are to blame as a leader. Now, that's a bit of tough love there, but the reality is this global data survey, actually from Gallup, has been running for 10 years now, and these numbers have not changed. But I think what we're going to see with the pandemic and the hybrid working situation is this is going to go up even further. Unless people are empowered, this remains a challenge. I also know that 30% of your brand new hires are looking for a job in 6 months. Now, maybe they've taken the job because they needed the money, maybe they had a number of other offers and they're waiting for something else to pan out. Maybe they arrived on day one into this organization and realized, hey, this is not what got sold to me in the job interview process. 46%, and particularly younger people, millennials, Gen Z, etc., those people are leaving earlier. I don't think you can expect your team members to last 10 years, 5 years, or even 2 years in a job nowadays. You've got to expect that the competition is fierce. If you're in a digital job, if you have an IT job title, you're going to be approached by Google, Facebook, every other scale-up and startup there is. They're going to be offering you equity, free lunch, great office environments. So are you offering enough as a manager to your team members, to your new hires, that they want to stay? Because salary is just not enough. If you actually are not getting a great relationship with employees, if you are not a good manager, you run the risk of your team members leaving in 6 months or leaving within 18. Loyalty is dead, engagement is a long-live engagement. And that's what it's all about nowadays. But you know, it's not all doom and gloom. Actually, if you turn into a great manager, good things happen. So great managers, people who actually are good performers, they're respected by their teams and so on, generate up to 4 times more sales. Now, this doesn't matter whether you're in the back office, front office, middle office, whether you're a frontline staff member, an intern, or the CEO. Good people have a flow-on effect inside an organization. They create virtuous circles. It also has a significant and tangible impact on the team that you work in. Good team members that are social, great environment of psychological safety, and a team leader that they can respect, trust, and admire actually reduces turnover in that team by up to 50%. I think generally you can see the black holes in your organization. The team areas with a bad manager where people leave, want to get out, don't want to work with that individual, they're pretty common. But great managers, they're magnetic. People stick to them. And you want to be a great manager. So let me look at that. So I've used the CEO of Microsoft, who's widely and universally regarded as a great manager. And the things that someone who is a great manager do kind of break down into 4 areas. First of all, you need to actually have the right data in front of you. You cannot make a gut feel decision around your team members. You need all this information from the systems that you manage. Who are your best, worst performers? Who are your best and worst managers? What does your diversity look like? Turnover, flight risks, who are your high potentials? What's their succession plan look like? Starting off by having the right data in front of you makes you a better leader by default. Next, you need the right actions. It's tough being a manager because you've got to have tough conversations. You've got to develop and coach staff. You've got to go through a process of onboarding people and exiting people. You shouldn't be exiting people and treating them like pariahs. They should be exiting people and kind of wanting to make them advocates. So making sure that you're clear with your HR group, with your manager and your team around you, what are the right actions is really critical. Self-improvement. Whether you have data systems in place or not, you need to make sure that you're self-reflecting, you're constantly and continuously improving yourself as a manager. You should be looking at training, you should be understanding a great way of looking at your learning and development programs. You should be looking at triggers inside your organization. If you have a team member that's left your team, it's time for self-reflection. What role did you cause? Did you cause that person to leave? Could you have actually made that person stay? Did you have a personality clash? How can I improve in terms of my learning and development? How can I use triggers based on the data I'm seeing around me? And of course, finally, there's a whole bunch of manager and employee-centric processes. You cannot leave this to HR alone. You need to take strong control over your onboarding program. Meet with your team monthly to understand their performance. How do you understand the engagement of your organization? How do you understand the cultural alignment? Is your management style kind of gelling with the people around you? Are you coaching people and are you putting them through the right L&D? So that's what you need to be looking at, the information and the dashboard you need in front of you as a great manager. And if you don't have these things, you're facing an uphill battle. Now, all of us have gone through the challenge, which is no one ever trains you to be a great manager. You turn up on the job one day, you're a functional expert or a technical expert, you get promoted and suddenly you're a manager. You have a team of people working with you. Then suddenly, a few years later, you're a manager of managers. Then you become a manager of managers. The challenge is every time you go up a rung, you actually you have the challenge of potentially reaching a level of incompetence as a manager. So you need this information in front of you. The right data, the right actions, self-improvement, and self-improvement translated to manager-employee-centric processes. The next part I want to talk about is I want to take a leaf out of what Google did. So in addition to what you need to do as a self-improvement and self-development, Google actually spent many years looking at what effective teams look like and how do you build high-performing teams. And actually they came up with a very simple 5-step answer. What they realized is it doesn't really matter who's on your team, rather how the team works together. So that's the simple secret that Google, over the course of their project rework, over many years discovered. And it actually came down to 5 key things. Number one, and the most important aspect here, is that you need to develop an environment of psychological safety. Let me let that sink in. You, as a manager, need to develop an environment of psychological safety. Now, you might be thinking, well, that's facilities, that's HR, that's my CEO, that's somebody else's job. No, it's yours. Now, what that means, I'll explain in the next slide, but it could be anything from the ability to take risks, the ability to actually share controversial ideas, the ability to have a debate and a dialogue which is not going to be career-threatening if you don't agree with your manager. Psychological safety and actually having an environment of it is the most critical element of a high-performing team. Next, it's about dependability. Then it's a structure and clarity, so everyone's got to know and come in with a clear sense of purpose. And that clear sense of purpose on a personal level has to translate to meaning across the job I do and what our organization is looking at. And finally, that sense of meaning has to then translate to impact. Nobody likes being a hamster on the wheel, just spinning and spinning and spinning, or being a cog in a large organization. People like to know that I have personal and organizational impact in the work that I'm doing. And to explain that, psychological safety. Can your team take risks without feeling insecure and embarrassed? Do you raise your voice to your team? Do you have an environment where you sit down with them and actually ask for their ideas? Do you shoot down your team's ideas without actually explaining why? Is there an environment where people can actually socialize and make friends at work? If you can't answer yes to all of those things, you have not built up an environment of psychological safety. And if there's one thing I wanted you to take out of today's session, if there's nothing else that you do, focus on creating an environment of psychological safety, because you become a great manager and your projects succeed much better if everyone feels safe, feels like the work they do matters. Dependability. So can I count on you? Can you count on me to consistently do high quality work on time, on budget, and within expectations? Consistency and dependability are important because you tend to find that people work at different paces, they work at different levels, then they have different skill sets. So having a clear sense as a manager about whether you are dependable or how dependable and complementary your team are together becomes very, very important. People want to work with people they can rely on. It builds trust. Next, structure and clarity. We all know how frustrating it is when you don't have a clear set of goals, when you have unclear roles and responsibilities, and you don't have a clear sense of your execution plan. What am I doing? Why am I here? What's going on? So often you might be hired into a role as a bit of a stopgap. You're trying to fill a goal, you're trying to fill a project, you're being thrown in because there's an open role. It's really important for a manager to be very, very clear, not just about the structure of the current role, what is that person's role purpose, but also where are they going to go? Can this person succession plan and take over my job? Can I succession plan them into a more senior role? What does their 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years look like? Now, I know it's incredibly difficult to do that because you need to talk to other managers, you need to talk to C-levels. It's tough. But the reality is you need to start with the short term, clearly articulating structure, goals, roles, and responsibilities, because frankly, this is low-hanging fruit. If you can do that, people feel trustworthy, they trust you, and it becomes clear about what they're doing and why they're doing it. Speaking of why, it's about the meaning. Again, I used to run a startup, and that startup was about looking at HR tech. And what got me out of bed when there was problems or people quit or we couldn't get the money on time or a client meeting didn't go well is I had a very clear purpose. My personal purpose was about trying to make work fair, to use data transparently to improve performance and actually help people who might not get a job otherwise, help people who are disadvantaged, and generally help the world of work be fairer and better. That got me out of bed. So you need to figure out what's important for you to get out of bed. And as a leader, you need to, an IT leader in particular, you need to communicate that to your team. It's so ordinarily what people do is focus on the tech, focus on the project, focus on the deliverable. You get too busy. There's a mountain of emails to get through. It's important to kind of relax, talk to the team, and be very clear about the meaning of what they're doing. Why are they doing the things that you're asking them to do? What does this ladder up to? And is it important? Because at the end of the day, impact of work, point 5, is what it's all about. Employees need to fundamentally believe the work they're doing matters. They need to believe from you, their manager, that what they do is making a difference and actually helping the world around them. So if you don't feel like the impact of your work is leading nowhere, you have a problem, because the impact of your work needs to lead to something. The impact of the team members that report into you needs to lead to something. So talking about the impact, whether you're saving lives in a hospital, whether you're closing a deal in sales that's leading to a greater revenue impact that allows the company to give back sustainably, whether it be about a new project you're implementing that is going to save man hours that ultimately leads to higher quality of work for working parents, whatever that is, you've got to understand what that impact is. Personal purpose is the meaning of work. Business purpose is impact. And those two things go hand in hand. Let me just quickly address a couple of questions that have come in. So there's one question that came in earlier about the 84% of digital transformations fail. Is it possible that building blocks shared are in place and still considered a failure? Yes. So having all the 5 building blocks supported by the people, you can have all those things in place and still fail. It really becomes about how deep you've gone. So overcoming resistance is one thing. You might have thought if you've done a great job overcoming resistance in one pocket, maybe it hasn't been organizational wide. Sometimes there's force majeure. Sometimes COVID happens and things will fall apart just because. It happened with the business I was involved in. Sometimes the regulatory environment changes. Sometimes the competitors outdo you. Sometimes the industry changes. So even if you do all the 5 building blocks and have the right people to support it, sometimes that happens. So I won't go into what success or failure looks like, but whoever asked that question, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to take you out for coffee and go through many great case studies, both in Singapore and around the world. Another question just came in, which is, I agree, personal trust and relationship with each staff member is critical. So talking about actually how you develop some useful tips in developing the skill. So the question is, how do you develop trust with your team? So I find the easiest way to do that is by being open and transparent. Now, many organizations, for whatever reason, have walls, have confidentiality in place, and just don't talk openly. I tend to find if you actually take a view of radical transparency, take a view that you want to actually leave almost everything open to the team members. Now, of course, there's some things you might want to shield. So people's salaries, for example, probably should be kept secret between them and HR and potentially their boss. But what you're working on personally, share that. Show your team members your to-do list, show your team members what you're working on. Also, tell them your priorities. I also tend to find another useful tool is actually motivation. So everyone is motivated very differently. Some are monetarily motivated, but often people are motivated by a learning journey, motivated by recognition, motivated by other factors. So if you as a manager can actually talk to your team about what motivates you, they get a clear sense of what you're all about. If you have a manager that's motivated by learning, so you can see suddenly why this manager is putting you on their learning and development programs, or is always out doing a webinar somewhere. It's not because they're trying to skip out on doing their day job. It means that they're so focused on their personal motivation, which is continuous learning. And that's great. So transparency around what you're working on, transparency around what motivates you, and also having the ability to have an open and honest dialogue with people tends to actually build personal trust. So just a couple of quick tips. But as I said, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to take you through some deeper case studies over a coffee, or maybe we can go back and forward via email. So I'll move to the second last skill, which is becoming a champion of data. Now this one's a little bit more technical, but this is really talking about the different states of data. So a survey done in 2019, so it's a couple of years old now, but it was actually a global survey looking at how do businesses feel about the data that they're using. Now, worryingly, 46% of businesses felt that their data is wrong and doesn't represent reality. I get that. I can see salespeople hate logging into CRM systems, so therefore they're not always necessarily updating their latest deal flows or where the latest sales information is coming from. I get that IT, it's very difficult to update project statuses, so things might be kind of left in a backlog somewhere, whether it be Trello, whether it be Miro, or a different kind of system out there. People don't always get around to updating the system. If you're in HR, understanding things like performance reviews, people basically kind of putting a very kind of light coating on, whether someone's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rating, not going deep into the reasons why, means that you've actually got very shallow data, or data that maybe doesn't represent the actual goings on in an organization. So whether it be sales, operations, IT, marketing, HR, any aspect of the business, I can see why people feel this way. Now, for your organization, do you have the same challenge? Do you find that the data may be wrong, out of date, or maybe isn't deep enough, doesn't represent the true reality of the business that you're in? So there are really 4 stages of data readiness. And I say this one with a bit of fun because you can figure out where you are. So the 4 stages are ye olde world. So ye olde world is actually where the companies you don't want to be are. Many people are probably somewhere a little bit more advanced. So they're either stuck in Excel hell, they're a tech geek, or everyone's truly trying to become a data genius, particularly if you're in the IT function. So ye olde world, so that's really about paper-based. This is SMEs, traditional family-run businesses, people that are kind of on the early side of their digital transformation journey. They probably have manual timesheets, they probably have manual processes, they might even have checks for payroll. I think we all know someone who's come from this type of organization or has actually worked in one themselves. Processes can be robust, but there's little data captured. So they generally don't have systems, probably don't even have an Excel spreadsheet. I've seen some of the biggest and best companies in the world that have a department that runs just like this. HR team that require you to sign off things manually, a CFO function that still actually does checks and cash for payroll rather than online transactions and so on. That frustrates the hell out of the IT department and people looking at digital. So, this is probably not where you want to be, but there are many traditional or SMEs that kind of fall into this category. Stuck in Excel hell, I don't think you're going to see this across most Singapore government departments. Of course, agencies, stat boards, and so on are using Excel a lot. But what we're seeing is most SMEs, most businesses out there are still stuck in Excel hell. There's some technology that helps automate data, but Excel is usually a go-to tool. You're stuck in the hell of actually doing pivot tables, looking at data, sharing things via very detailed Excel spreadsheets. It's difficult. You generally got to actually translate that into a PowerPoint. You've got to send Excel spreadsheets, require explanation. It's difficult. But despite even the most modern, the most cutting edge businesses having the tools available to them, many companies are still stuck in this kind of lingering hell of actually focused on just using Excel for their data. But we get a bit more advanced here. So we start talking about the tech geek. If your organization does everything on a mobile, you're a tech geek, and your organization is tech geeky. This is where you want to be. So if you can access your HR systems, your IT systems, your marketing systems, your sales systems, your ops from your mobile device across everything, you're in a fantastic place. But it does mean that often there's a fragmented tool set. Of course, there's going to be a few large, expensive company-mandated tools, Oracle, SAP, Salesforce, IBM, etc. So there'll be a few big systems, your email system, your CRM, your ERP, etc. But so often there's a few smaller tools. Maybe there's a expense claim system that you're using, working with a couple of startups to do some cool tools around at different parts of the business and so on. Data is much more easily available, but because of the fragmentation, it tends not to be easily accessible or used. And this is usually the purview of much larger companies that have spent the time to invest. And of course, data genius is where you want to be. This is the most advanced stage of IT and data. This is where you can answer any business question in real time with all the data at your fingertips. IT is the enabler of the positive business outcomes. So if you want to know what's happening with your marketing at any point, regardless of which function you're in, you can quickly pull up a report. You can see it on a digital screen. There's a command center or innovation lab that you've built. You can see it anywhere and everywhere. If you understand your real-time sales data, your HR systems, what's going on with the project, what your customers are saying about you, all that data, both inside the organization and outside, should be available to you anywhere, anytime, everywhere. This is rarely seen. This will eventually be backed up by AI. This will be enabled by machine learning, but this is the utopia that most IT gurus are going after. How do we make all the data in the organization available to everyone on an appropriate role-based basis? So the question is, where are you in that journey? Are you stuck in the past? Are you stuck in Excel hell? Have you moved towards mobile? Or are you a true data genius that's using data in real time everywhere across your organization? So data literacy becomes important no matter where you are in that journey. Looking at some recent data, we saw that there was a report done with about, I think it was a few thousand businesses worldwide with a particular focus on the APAC region. We found that 98% of survey respondents said it's very important or important to have data literacy. But 30% of the respondents said that they are not data literate. They are not. So 30% of companies are struggling. Transformation program. So the advice is start with your leadership program. Make sure you've got the department heads across data literacy, roll out a 0 to 1 program, call it a digital passport or a basic digital training for all employees. Just get people singing from the same songbook. have at least a base level of digital training that people can refer back to and use as a basis for common language. There are 3 ways that you can improve data literacy. So first of all, have a clear understanding of what you want to track. It's not a challenge of do you have access to the right data, but it's what kind of data is going to be useful in my job? What kind of data is going to be useful to my organization? So having a clear understanding as an IT leader of what you can actually, what you can measure, what you should measure, and what you are measuring is important. And also making sure you sit down with the board, CEO, and department head to make sure that they agree as well. Of course, once you've got that data, you need to understand how that data is being used. I'd like you to get very comfortable with business metrics. Sales, operating costs, customer satisfaction, employee turnover, performance, and engagement. This will take you beyond your own function and area, but it's important for you to actually, again, develop yourself as a leader to understand the wider business impact of the data that you need. The data you need, the data that drives the business, and the levers that you need to pull to get there. So as an IT leader, take control of the numbers, make sure they're understood by all employees, and get people back on talking the same language. And as I talked about earlier, it's important to get digital capability. Now, this doesn't matter about whether you're launching a digital transformation program or you're just looking at actually the data governance and the data roadmap that you've got for your own organization. You need to ensure a good level of digital competency. I'll move to the final skill, which is self-awareness. Now, again, this is very much a soft skill, and not a lot of people talk about self-awareness and reflection. Now, is this you? 90% of managers believe that they are self-aware. 95% believe that they are self-aware. But only 15% are actually self-aware. So you've got to 80% of people who are deluded. So are you the 95%, are you the 15%, or you're somewhere in between? I think most people realize that they're probably not as self-aware as they need to be. Maybe they're actually not self-aware enough of that to realize it. But the challenge is, if you think you're self-aware, you're probably not. Now, why does that matter? Because as a leader, self-awareness helps you with a number of things that we've touched on. Working with others in a team. No surprise, 58% of people actually self-awareness helps them match their skill sets, match collaboration tools and techniques, and basically socialize better. On a personal level, it helps you cope with stress. Your self-awareness of what you can do, what you can't do, and your kind of gaps are really, really important for you to understand stress. Not everyone is Superman, Superwoman. Not everyone can actually have that superhuman ability to actually do everything and anything. So understanding where your limitations are, what you're good at, what your weaknesses are, is definitely going to help you cope with stress. It also helps you on a personal level, act as a coach, deal with change, and of course, deal with clients. So that's really much the relationship aspect. At the core of relationships is trust and self-awareness. If you are self-aware, it leads to a great level of openness in communication, a greater level of collaboration, and of course, it leads to fantastic results for you and your business. The second last slide here is really, what do you need to do to help with your self-awareness? It's important to look at yourself objectively. Define your personal and business goals, keep a journal, and practice regular self-reflection. I tend to find that if you're doing that on at least a weekly basis, looking back over what happened on last week and actually taking a little bit of time to plan the next week, it's a very good practice. Which leads to the second point, meditate. Set time to plan. If you wake up early in the morning, say 6 o'clock, use that kind of twilight time to plan your day, to plan your week, and to plan how you want to engage with your team and your customers. Practice meditation, mindfulness if you want, if that's something that you're into. I highly recommend it. It does make you a better manager. And finally, gather feedback. Normally, organizations have a fantastic annual appraisal system, but look at implementing some 360 feedback tools, check in with your team, and even ask friends or colleagues for really honest feedback. Say, hey, how am I doing? Am I good at this? Am I bad at this? Can you kind of do a sanity check with me, please? And finally, in summary, there are top 5 skills you need in the digital age. To recap, you need to become a leader in digital transformation, to understand when things go right, when things fail, and how to overcome them. Number two, you need to become an expert in managing change yourself, understanding the change management cycle, and looking at overcoming both your own and your employee resistance. To be an excellent leader, you need to be an excellent people manager. So what are the aspects of people management that are important? Having the right data, engaging your employees well, building trust, and defining an environment of psychological safety. Next, it's about actually using data and using data well. So where are you in that data journey? Which are the 4 stages? How do you actually make data available at your fingertips? How do you have a common language around the data you're going to be using in your organization? And finally, how do you become a better manager and leader by becoming much more self-aware? Reflect on who you are, look at your strengths and weaknesses, keep a journal, plan well, meditate, and focus on mindfulness. And all of these 5 things will actually hold you in good stead to be a leader in the digital age. With that, thank you very much. And that's the end of the presentation. I'm very happy to take any questions in the chat if you have a minute or so to ask those questions. There's one quick question I can answer before we close down, which is question: who drives digital literacy? Is that well? Actually, it should be the IT team. It won't be HR. HR will be your enabler. So it's either the department head that actually is deeply impacted by data. So it could be the CFO, it could be a sales team. But I tend to find it could be the CIO and the CTO. Those roles tend to be fantastic because they actually have a wider view of data. Work with your CEO, work with your HR team, roll out an organization-wide program, but own it from the IT function. Now, I'll be told I've got to close off, but thanks very much, everyone. Feel free to reach out. My name's Damien Cummings, and it's been wonderful talking to you today. Thank you very much.